Before you begin, a few things matter. This audiobook isn't meant to be rushed. It is an entertainment, and it isn't designed for constant stimulation. It's meant to be absorbed. You may get the most value listening passively, on walks, in the car, or during quiet moments, letting the ideas settle without force. Some parts will feel subtle. Others may hit later, on a second or maybe even a third listen. That's intentional. This isn't about acquiring information. It's about training awareness. You're not expected to remember everything. You're not expected to agree with everything, only to notice how your thinking responds. At times, you'll recognize patterns in yourself, in others, or in past decisions. At other times, you feel resistance. Pay attention to the resistance. That's often where the insight begins. There's no finish line here, no transformation moment, only gradual refinement. Listen once and you'll hear the ideas. Listen again and you may begin to see them. That's the purpose of this work. Part 1. The Problem with Thinking. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Intelligence. Intelligence is often misunderstood. Most people believe it is measured by speed, how quickly an answer happens, how fast a decision is made, how confidently someone speaks. In reality, speed has very little to do with effective thinking. Some of the most damaging decisions in history were made quickly, confidently, and by highly intelligent individuals. The problem is not a lack of intelligence. The problem is the way intelligence is used. Human thinking evolved for survival, not accuracy. The brain was designed to conserve energy, simplify complexity, and respond rapidly to perceived threats. These traits were once necessary. They allowed early humans to act decisively in dangerous environments where hesitation meant death. But in modern life, these same mechanisms often work against us. Today's problems are rarely physical. They are abstract, financial, social, strategic. They unfold slowly and involve layers of cause and effect that cannot be solved through instinct alone. Yet the brain continues to treat them as emergencies. When faced with uncertainty, the mind reaches for shortcuts. It searches for patterns that feel familiar. It gravitates towards conclusions that reduce discomfort. It prioritizes relief over accuracy. This creates the illusion of intelligence. A person feels certain not because the conclusion is correct, but because uncertainty has been removed. Certainty is emotionally satisfying. It provides closure. It allows the mind to move on. Unfortunately, certainty is often unrelated to truth. This is why two people can look at the same situation and reach completely different conclusions, both feeling equally confident. Confidence is not evidence of clarity. It is often evidence that the mind has just stopped searching. True thinking is slower. It involves resisting the urge to decide prematurely. It requires the ability to hold multiple possibilities in mind without collapsing into the first comfortable explanation. This skill is rare, not because it is difficult, but because it is uncomfortable. The human brain dislikes unresolved questions. It seeks answers quickly, even when those answers are incomplete. This tendency explains why intelligent people can repeatedly make poor decisions under pressure. When stress increases, the brain does not become more analytical. It becomes more primitive. Attention narrows. Emotional responses strengthen. The desire for immediate resolution intensifies. At that moment, intelligence becomes less relevant than training. The mind falls back on what it knows, habits, assumptions, and past experiences, regardless of whether they apply to the current situation. This is not failure. It's design. Understanding this distinction is the first step toward developing real strategic thinking. Because strategic thinkers are not those with higher intelligence. They are those who have trained their minds to resist their own impulses. They pause when others rush. They question when others conclude. They observe when others react. And in doing so, they begin to see what others miss. This book is about developing that ability, not through motivation, not through tricks, but through understanding how thinking actually works and how it can be trained. Chapter 2: Why Smart People Still Lose. It is tempting to believe that intelligence protects people from failure. It does not. In fact, intelligence often creates its own vulnerabilities. Highly intelligent individuals tend to trust their reasoning abilities. They believe that because they can think well, they will naturally think correctly. This assumption is subtle, but dangerous. Intelligence increases confidence faster than it increases accuracy. The smarter a person becomes, the easier it is to justify flawed conclusions. Complex reasoning can be used not only to find truth, but to defend existing beliefs. This is why intelligence alone does not produce wisdom. Smart people are often better at explaining their mistakes than preventing them. When a decision fails, they can construct convincing narratives for why it was reasonable at the time. The explanation sounds logical. The language is polished. The outcome, however, remains unchanged. The mind does not learn from outcomes, it learns from interpretation. If failure is interpreted as unavoidable or externally caused, the internal process remains unexamined. The same thinking patterns are preserved, the same errors repeat. This creates quite a cycle. Smart individuals continue making similar mistakes each time believing the circumstances were different. Over time, this cycle becomes frustrating. They begin to feel unlucky, underappreciated, misunderstood. The reality is more precise. They are using intelligence reactively rather than strategically. Reactive intelligence responds to situations as they appear. It focuses on solving immediate problems. It is efficient, fast, and often impressive. Strategic intelligence operates differently. It focuses less on solving and more on positioning. Instead of asking, "What should I do now?" it asks, "What situation am I creating?" This distinction changes everything. Many failures do not occur because the wrong decision was made in the moment, but because earlier decisions quietly limited future options. A rushed agreement reduces leverage later. An emotional response reshapes relationships permanently. A short-term win, though, eliminates flexibility down the line. By the time consequences appear, the original decision is long forgotten. Smart people often lose because they optimize for the present without accounting for the future. They solve what is visible and ignore what is forming. This is not negligence, it is attentional blindness. The mind naturally focuses on what demands attention now. Strategic thinking requires awareness of what does not yet demand attention, but soon will. This is why experience alone does not guarantee improvement. Without reflection, experience simply reinforces habits. Years pass. Decisions accumulate. Patterns repeat. The individual becomes highly competent within a narrow range and fragile outside of it. True strategic thinkers develop a different relationship with uncertainty. They do not attempt to eliminate it, they work within it. They assume their understanding is incomplete. They expect unforeseen variables. They design decisions that remain stable even when conditions change. This is not pessimism, it is realism. Strength is not found in perfect prediction, but in resilience to surprise. Smart people lose when they assume intelligence is enough. Strategic thinkers win because they understand it is not. Chapter 3: The Autopilot Mind. Much of human behavior occurs without conscious thought. This is not a flaw, it is a necessity. The brain processes enormous amounts of information every second. Conscious awareness cannot handle this volume. So, to function efficiently, the mind delegates most activity to automatic systems. Breathing, walking, reading familiar words, interpreting facial expressions. These processes run quietly in the background. Decision making, however, often joins them. Over time, the brain builds templates for action. When a situation resembles something encountered before, the mind retrieves a pre-packaged response. This is autopilot. Autopilot is not stupidity, it is efficiency. It allows the brain to conserve energy by avoiding repeated analysis of similar situations. The problem arises when situations appear similar, but are not. Autopilot does not evaluate context deeply, it matches surface features and acts accordingly. This leads to pattern-based decisions that feel correct but are subtly misaligned. A disagreement feels like a threat, so defensiveness emerges. A delay feels like failure, so urgency increases. A familiar opportunity resembles past success, so caution disappears. In each case, the response is fast, confident, and often wrong. Autopilot thrives under pressure. When stress increases, conscious reasoning weakens. The brain prioritizes speed over accuracy. This is why high pressure moments often produce regret later. The mind did not choose poorly, it chose automatically. Most people assume they are thinking when they are actually recalling. They are not analyzing the present, they're just replaying the past. Autopilot thinking is invisible because it feels like choice. Only afterward does the gap appear, when outcomes fail to align with intentions. Training the mind begins with recognition. Until a person learns to notice when autopilot is active, it cannot be overridden. This awareness alone creates distance, a pause, a moment in which response is no longer inevitable. Strategic thinking begins not with better answers, but with better interruptions. Chapter 4: Pressure and the Collapse of Reason. Pressure alters perception. When stakes rise, the brain does not simply feel urgency, it begins to process information differently. Your attention narrows, peripheral details fade, options that once seemed available disappear from awareness. This response is purely biological. Under perceived threat, the mind prioritizes survival. It reduces complexity to accelerate action. In physical danger, this is useful. In modern decision making, it is often destructive. Pressure creates the illusion that time is scarce, even when it is not. The mind interprets urgency as necessity. Action feels mandatory, hesitation feels risky. As a result, decisions are made not because they are correct, but because they provide relief. Relief. Relief becomes the hidden objective. Ending discomfort replaces optimizing outcomes. This is why pressure-based decisions frequently feel right in the moment and wrong later. The brain was not solving the problem, it was escaping tension. Reason collapses gradually, not suddenly. First, nuance disappears. Then, alternatives shrink. Finally, only one option seems viable, the one that allows movement, just something. At that stage, thinking is already ended. Strategic thinkers learn to recognize this internal shift. They notice when urgency rises without external justification. They sense when emotional discomfort is being mistaken for time pressure. This awareness creates a crucial separation. They do not rush to remove pressure, they examine it. Often, pressure is not coming from reality, it is coming from expectation, from fear of appearing indecisive, from discomfort with uncertainty, from the desire to regain control. When pressure is psychological rather than practical, speed rarely improves outcomes. In these moments, slowing down is not avoidance, it's discipline. The ability to remain deliberate under pressure is not natural, it must be trained. Without training, even intelligence minds default to instinct. Under pressure, thinking does not improve, it reverts. Part 2: How the Mind Fails. Chapter 5: Mental Shortcuts. The human brain relies on shortcuts to function. These shortcuts, known as heuristics, allow rapid judgments with minimal effort. They're efficient, and most of the time they work well enough. The problem is not that shortcuts exist, the problem is that they are invisible. Because they operate beneath awareness, their influence often goes unquestioned. A conclusion feels obvious. A judgment feels intuitive. A reaction feels justified. Few people pause to ask why. One common shortcut is familiarity bias. What feels familiar is interpreted as safe. Ideas, people, or strategies that resemble past experiences are favored, regardless of current conditions. This explains why outdated approaches persist long after they stop working. Another shortcut is availability bias. The mind overweights information that is recent, vivid, or emotionally charged. A single memorable example can outweigh years of real stats. A rare failure becomes a defining fear. A recent success becomes false confidence. The brain mistakes memorability for probability. There is also confirmation bias, the tendency to search for evidence that supports existing beliefs while ignoring what contradicts them. Once a narrative forms, the mind becomes its defender. Contradictory information is reinterpreted, minimized, or dismissed. These shortcuts are not signs of weakness. They are features. But unexamined features become vulnerabilities. Strategic thinkers do not attempt to eliminate mental shortcuts. They learn where shortcuts fail. They understand which decisions require deeper analysis and which do not. The difference lies in awareness. Automatic thinking is efficient. Intentional thinking is selective. Knowing when to switch between them is the skill. Chapter 6: Emotional Hijacking. Emotion is not the enemy of thinking. Unnoticed emotion is. Every decision carries emotional weight: fear, pride, hope, frustration. These states shape perception long before logic becomes involved. When emotion intensifies, it begins to dominate attention. This process is known as emotional hijacking. During a hijack, the rational mind does not disappear, it becomes subordinate. Logic is used to justify emotion rather than to evaluate it. A decision feels justified because it aligns with how the individual wants to feel. Anger seeks expression, fear seeks escape, pride seeks validation. The explanations come later. This is why people often regret not what they decided, but how they decided. The outcome may have been acceptable, the process was compromised. Emotional hijacking is most dangerous because it masquerades as personal convictions. Strong feelings create strong certainty. The individual believes they are being decisive when they are simply just being driven. Strategic thinkers do not suppress emotion, they create distance from it. They delay action until intensity subsides. They recognize emotional urgency as a signal, not a command. They understand that clarity improves when emotion cools down. This restraint is not weakness, it is control. The ability to feel strongly without acting immediately is a defining trait of high-level decision makers. Emotion informs. Chapter 7: Comfort Bias. The human mind prefers comfort over correctness. This preference is subtle. It rarely announces itself. Instead, it shapes decisions quietly, steering behavior toward what feels manageable rather than what is accurate. Comfort bias explains why people remain in situations they understand, even when those situations no longer serve them. The familiar offers predictability. Even when outcomes are negative, predictability reduces anxiety. The unknown, by contrast, demands cognitive effort. It requires learning, adaptation, and the acceptance of risk. The brain interprets this as threat. As a result, many decisions are not made to improve circumstances but to maintain psychological stability. People tolerate insufficient systems because change feels exhausting. They remain in unproductive roles because leaving creates uncertainty. They repeat ineffective strategies because at least the failure is recognizable. Comfort bias does not feel like fear, it feels like practicality. Statements such as "this is good enough" or "now isn't the right time" often conceal a deeper motive: avoidance of cognitive strain. Strategic thinking requires willingness to remain uncomfortable. Growth almost always introduces temporary disorder. Established routines must be questioned, assumptions must be dismantled. The mind resists this process, not because it is incapable, but because it is protective. Understanding this resistance prevents misinterpretation. Discomfort is not a signal that something is wrong, it is often a signal that something new is forming. Those who mistake discomfort for danger retreat. Those who recognize it as transition progress. Chapter 8: Familiar Patterns, Repeated Mistakes. Patterns are powerful. They allow rapid recognition. They compress experience into usable knowledge. Without patterns, learning would be impossible. But patterns can also deceive. When the brain identifies a familiar structure, it stops analyzing details. It assumes similarity equals equivalence. This assumption is usually incorrect. Two situations may share surface traits while differing in critical variables. When this occurs, past solutions become liabilities. The mind applies yesterday's answer to today's problem. This is how experience becomes outdated. Repeated mistakes rarely feel repetitive from the inside. Each occurrence appears unique: different people, different timing, different context. Yet the underlying structure remains unchanged. Until the pattern itself is examined, outcomes will not vary. Strategic thinkers study patterns at a deeper level. They ask not what happened, but what keeps happening. This shift reframes failure. Mistakes become data rather than evidence of incompetence. Patterns reveal leverage points, small adjustments that alter entire outcomes. Without pattern awareness, effort increases while effectiveness stagnates. Recognition without reflection is just going to produce repetition. Part 3, Strategic Thinking. This section marks a transition. Up to this point, the focus has been understanding how thinking fails. Now the focus becomes how effective thinking is constructed. Strategic thinking is not a personality trait, it's a method. This can be learned, practiced, and refined. The difference lies not in intellect, but in structure. Chapter 9, Systems over Events. Most people perceive life as a series of isolated events. A problem appears, a decision is made, a result follows. This linear model is comforting and incomplete. In reality, outcomes emerge from systems. A system is a network of interacting parts that influence one another over time. Events are merely visible expressions of deeper mechanisms. When a system functions poorly, treating events individually produces temporary relief at best. Symptoms return. Frustration increases. Complexity grows. Strategic thinkers look beneath events. They seek recurring forces, incentives, feedback loops, and constraints. Instead of asking why something happened, they ask what made it likely. This distinction shifts attention away from blame and towards structure. Systems thinking reveals why repeated effort often yields diminishing returns. Without structural change, increased intensity produces marginal improvement. Fixing the visible issue does not repair the system that created it. True leverage exists at the system level. Small structural adjustments can outperform massive effort directed at symptoms. This is why strategic thinkers often appear to do less while achieving more. They are not reacting to noise. Chapter 10, Second Order Consequences. Every decision creates more than one effect. The first order effect is immediate and obvious. The second order effect is delayed and subtle. Most people stop at the first. For example, a strict rule may increase short-term compliance, but reduce trust long-term. A quick financial win may stabilize the present, but weakening future flexibility. A forceful correction may solve a problem while discouraging honesty later. Second-order consequences accumulate quietly. By the time they become visible, the original decision is rarely reconsidered. Strategic thinkers extend their thinking beyond the immediate outcome. They ask what behaviors a decision encourages. What habits does this reinforce? What future options it eliminates? This requires patience. Second order effects unfold slowly. They are invisible to reactive minds, yet they determine long term success. Short term optimization often undermines your long term resilience, it always will. Understanding this distinction prevents many costly decisions. Chapter 11, Probability, Not Certainty. The human mind craves certainty. Certainty feels stabilizing. It quiets anxiety. It creates the impression of control. When uncertainty disappears, psychological tension eases, even if the conclusion is incorrect. This is why people often rush to decide. They're not seeking accuracy, they're just seeking relief. In complex environments, certainty is rarely available. Outcomes are influenced by countless variables, many invisible at the moment that these decisions are made. Despite this, the mind continues to ask a flawed question. Will this work? This question implies a binary outcome, success or failure, 0 or 1. Reality does not operate this way. Most decisions exist on a spectrum of likelihoods. They're probabilities, not guarantees. Strategic thinkers replace certainty-based thinking with probabilistic thinking. They do not attempt to predict the future precisely. They evaluate ranges of possible outcomes and assign relative likelihoods to each. Instead of asking whether a decision will succeed, they ask, how often does this type of decision succeed in similar conditions? What usually goes wrong? What variables matter most? What assumptions am I relying on? This shift alone dramatically improves decision quality. Probability thinking reduces emotional attachment to specific outcomes. When success is framed as likelihood rather than expectation, disappointment becomes information rather than personal failure. This mindset also encourages contingency planning. If multiple outcomes are considered in advance, surprise loses all of its power. When reality deviates from expectation, adjustment becomes a lot easier. Poor decisions are often not irrational, they're overconfident. Overconfidence emerges when probability is mistaken for certainty. A decision with a 60% chance of success still fails 4 times out of 10. Without this understanding, failure feels shocking rather than normal. Strategic thinkers accept variance. They do not interpret negative outcomes as proof of incompetence if the process was sound. They separate decision quality from outcome quality. This distinction is critical. Good decisions can produce bad outcomes. Bad decisions can occasionally succeed. Only by evaluating the process can learning occur. Without probability thinking, individuals chase luck and misinterpret noise as signal. With it, they're going to build consistency over time. Chapter 12: Leverage and Asymmetry. Not all effort produces equal results. This truth is obvious in theory and frequently ignored in practice. Many people equate progress with activity. They assume more work leads to better outcomes. When results disappoint, they respond by increasing intensity. This approach is inefficient. Leverage describes situations where small actions produce disproportionately large effects. Asymmetry refers to imbalances between input and output. Strategic thinkers search relentlessly for these imbalances. They understand that most systems are uneven. A few variables matter far more than the rest. Identifying these variables creates an enormous advantage. In organizations, one key process often determines overall performance. In relationships, one recurring behavior often shapes trust. In personal development, one habit frequently compounds into many others. Without leverage awareness, effort scatters. With it, your effort concentrates. Leverage is often unintuitive. The most impactful moves rarely feel urgent. They are often structural, preventative, or even invisible. Because leverage acts over time, it does not provide immediate emotional reward. This is why it is frequently overlooked. Reactive thinking seeks motion. Strategic thinking seeks position. Position determines future options. Those with strong position can afford mistakes. Those without it cannot. Leverage is not about control. It is about placement. Placing energy where it multiplies. Placing energy where it compounds. Placing decisions where they shape future conditions. This is why strategic thinkers appear calm. They are not solving everything at once. Part 4: Decisions under Uncertainty. Chapter 13: Why Speed Feels Smart. Speed carries status. Fast answers are often mistaken for intelligence. Quick responses suggest confidence. Decisiveness is praised. Hesitation is interpreted as weakness. From an early age, people are rewarded for responding quickly. In classrooms, the first hand raised is noticed. In meetings, the first voice heard often sets the direction. Over time, speed becomes associated with competence. This association is very misleading. Speed feels smart because it reduces discomfort. When a question arises, uncertainty follows. The mind experiences tension until an answer appears. Responding quickly eliminates that tension, creating a sense of relief. Relief is then misinterpreted as correctness. The brain learns that fast decisions feel good, regardless of quality. In complex environments, this conditioning becomes dangerous. Modern problems rarely reward immediacy. They require interpretation, context, and an anticipation. Speed may produce movement, but movement is not progress. Many failures originate not from poor logic, but from premature logic. A decision made too early cannot incorporate information that is not yet surfaced. Speed narrows perspective. It privileges what is visible now over what is forming quietly. Strategic thinkers understand that delay is not indecision, it's data collection. They allow ambiguity to exist longer than most people can tolerate. This tolerance creates clarity. The ability to sit with unanswered questions without forcing resolution is a defining characteristic of advanced thinking. Fast thinkers often appear impressive, slow thinkers often appear accurate. In high stakes environments, accuracy compounds, impression does not. Speed has its place, but only after understanding is complete. Moving quickly in the wrong direction is not efficiency. Chapter 14: Slowing Time Mentally. Time perception changes under pressure. When stakes rise, moments feel compressed. Options seem limited. The future feels closer than it actually is. This distortion creates urgency where none may exist. Strategic thinkers learn to counteract this effect. They do not control time itself. They control their experience of it. Slowing time mentally does not mean delaying action indefinitely. It means creating internal space before responding. This space allows evaluation to re-enter the process. One method is intentional pause, a brief delay, seconds or minutes. This interrupts automatic response. It re-engages conscious thought. Another method is reframing urgency. Asking whether immediate action is truly required often reveals that perceived deadlines are psychological rather than real. Many pressures exist only in expectation. The mind confuses social discomfort with actual consequence. By questioning urgency, strategic thinkers regain perspective. They also extend their temporal frame. Rather than focusing solely on the present moment, they imagine themselves days or months ahead, looking back on the decision. This mental distance reduces emotional intensity. What feels overwhelming now often appears obvious later. Accessing that future perspective early improves judgment. Slowing time is not passive, it is intentional restraint. It allows the mind to move from reaction into analysis. Those who master this skill operate differently under stress. While others accelerate, they stabilize. While others narrow, they widen. This contrast creates advantage. Chapter 15: Pattern Recognition versus Pattern Blindness. Pattern recognition is one of the mind's greatest strengths. It allows prediction. It enables learning. It compresses experience into insight. However, pattern recognition can fail when it becomes pattern assumption. The brain begins to see what it expects rather than what exists. This is pattern blindness. Pattern blindness occurs when familiarity replaces observation. Once a label is applied, this type of person, this kind of problem, this always happens, perception adjusts to support it. Details that contradict the assumed pattern are ignored. The mind stops looking. This is why experienced individuals can miss emerging shifts. Their expertise becomes a filter. They recognize past patterns quickly, but fail to notice when conditions change. Strategic thinkers guard against this by remaining curious. They treat patterns as hypotheses, not conclusions. They ask whether similarities are structural or superficial. They distinguish between repeated outcomes and repeated causes. This distinction matters. Different causes can produce identical results. Treating them as the same leads to ineffective solutions. True pattern recognition evolves. It adapts. It updates. It remains flexible. Pattern blindness, by contrast, hardens over time. It creates confidence without awareness. The more experience accumulates, the harder it becomes to challenge assumptions, unless intentional reflection is maintained. Chapter 16: False Confidence. Confidence is persuasive. It influences perception, shapes credibility, and often determines who is followed. In many environments, confidence is mistaken for competence. This confusion is costly. False confidence does not arise from deception alone. It often emerges naturally from incomplete understanding. When a person grasps part of a situation, that partial clarity can feel complete. The mind fills missing information with assumptions. Confidence increases not because understanding has expanded, but because uncertainty has been reduced artificially. This is why early learning stages often feel empowering. A small amount of knowledge can create a large sense of mastery. Only later does complexity reappear. This phenomenon explains why individuals with moderate experience sometimes display more confidence than true experts. Experts recognize the limits of their understanding. They are aware of edge cases, hidden variables, and exceptions. Their caution is misinterpreted as hesitation. False confidence is attractive because it simplifies reality. It provides clean answers where complexity exists. It eliminates that ambiguity. For listeners, followers, and decision makers, this clarity can feel reassuring, but clarity built on a mission is fragile. When conditions shift, false confidence collapses quickly. Strategic thinkers cultivate calibrated confidence. They communicate clearly without overstating certainty. They acknowledge unknowns without surrendering direction. Their confidence is grounded not in prediction, but in adaptability. They trust their ability to respond, not their ability to foresee. This distinction allows stability in changing environments. Confidence anchored in flexibility will endure, and confidence anchored in certainty will shatter. Part 5: Executive Frameworks. Chapter 17: The Outside View. The human mind views problems from the inside. This perspective is emotionally rich and informationally poor. When personally involved, individuals focus on details unique to their situation. They emphasize differences rather than similarities. They believe their circumstances are exceptional. This is known as the inside view. The inside view leads to optimism bias. Plans feel more achievable. Timelines appear shorter. Risk seems more manageable. Intentions are mistaken for outcomes. The outside view corrects this distortion. It asks a different question. What typically happens in situations just like this? Instead of examining intentions, it examines history. Instead of focusing on uniqueness, it searches for patterns across comparable cases. The outside view replaces personal narrative with statistical realities. This approach is uncomfortable, and it often contradicts hope. Yet it dramatically improves forecasting accuracy. Strategic thinkers intentionally shift between views. They consider personal factors, but they do not privilege them. They allow external data to challenge their internal beliefs. This balance prevents both naive optimism and excessive pessimism. It grounds decisions in reality rather than aspiration. The outside view does not eliminate risk, it reveals it. Seeking risk clearly is the prerequisite for managing it effectively. Chapter 18: Inversion Thinking. Most people approach problems by asking how to succeed. Strategic thinkers often begin by asking how to fail. This reversal is known as inversion thinking. Rather than building upward from goals, inversion works backwards from disaster. What would guarantee failure? What behaviors would undermine progress? What conditions would make success impossible? By identifying these factors, they can be systematically avoided. This approach exposes vulnerabilities that forward thinking often misses. When focused solely on success, individuals will overlook fragility. When focused on failure, weaknesses become obvious. Inversion will simplify this complexity. It reduces overwhelming objectives into preventable errors. Many failures are not caused by lack of brilliance, but by avoidable mistakes. Eliminating major failure modes often produce success just by default. Strategic thinkers use inversion to stress test decisions. They ask what could go wrong, not hypothetically, but realistically. They imagine embarrassment, loss, and breakdown, not to induce fear, but to reveal blind spots. This discipline will create resilience. By preparing for what could fail, they reduce the cost of surprise. Inversion transforms anxiety into preparation. Chapter 19: Premortems. Most planning focuses on success. Goals are defined, steps are outlined, obstacles are acknowledged briefly, then set aside. Attention moves forward with optimism. Premortems reverse this sequence. A premortem begins with the assumption that a plan has failed. Not partially, completely. Fallen apart. The outcome is disappointing. The objective was missed. The effort did not produce the intended result. From this imagined future, the thinker asks a simple question: what went wrong? This exercise removes defensiveness. Because failure is assumed, the mind no longer protects the plan. It becomes free to criticize it openly and honestly. Weak assumptions surface. Dependencies become clearly visible. Overlooked constraints start to emerge. What seems solid begin to show cracks. Premortems counteract groupthink and overconfidence. When teams plan together, social pressure encourages agreement. Doubts remain unspoken. Concerns, they feel disruptive. The premortem legitimizes doubt. It gives permission to speak what would otherwise remain internal. Individually, the same effect occurs. The mind becomes less attached to its initial idea. Attachment is often the enemy of clarity. By emotionally detaching from success, strategic thinkers increase the likelihood of achieving it. Premortems do not eliminate risk, they expose it early when correction is still possible. Many failures occurred not because risks were unknown, but because they were unacknowledged. Premortems turn vague unease into actionable insights. Chapter 20: The Discipline of the Pause. Pausing is uncomfortable. In moments of tension, action feels safer than stillness. Doing something, anything, provides the illusion of control. The pause disrupts this instinct. It interrupts momentum. It delays resolution and it forces awareness. For this reason, pausing is often avoided. Yet it is one of the most powerful tools available to a strategic thinker. The pause creates separation between stimulus and response. Within that space, choice becomes possible. Without it, reaction is inevitable. The pause does not need to be long. Often, a few seconds are sufficient. What matters is intentionality. The individual acknowledges the urge to act and chooses not to immediately follow that. This small act restores agency. With practice, pausing becomes automatic. Emotion arises, but actions wait. Pressure appears, but urgency is questioned. The pause allows the mind to re-enter the decision. It brings reasoning back online. Over time, this discipline fundamentally changes behavior. Decisions become fewer but higher quality. Mistakes become less frequent. Regret diminishes. Those who master the pause appear calm under pressure. Part 6: Training the Brain. Up to this point, the focus has been frameworks and awareness. Understanding, however, is not enough. Insight does not create change, repetition does. Thinking patterns, like physical habits, are strengthened through use. Without deliberate practice, old defaults will return. Training the mind requires intention. Chapter 21: Mental Repetition. The brain learns through repetition. Neural pathways strengthen when activated consistently. This process occurs regardless of whether behavior is beneficial or harmful. Reactivity practice repeatedly becomes instinct. So does restraint. Most people train their minds accidentally. They repeat the same reactions, the same shortcuts, the same assumptions, reinforcing patterns they do not consciously choose. Strategic thinkers train deliberately. They practice slowing down. They rehearse questioning assumptions. They reflect after decisions, not only when outcomes are negative. Mental repetition occurs during reviews. After an important choice, critical thinkers, they ask, what was I feeling? What information did I ignore? What assumptions did I make? What would I do differently next time? This reflection rewires future behaviors. Without reflection, experience simply just accumulates. With it, experience will transform. Training the mind is not about thinking harder, it is about thinking more intentionally. Chapter 22: Building Strategic Awareness. Awareness precedes control. Before behavior can change, it must be observed. Strategic awareness involves monitoring one's own thinking in real time. This includes noticing emotional shifts, identifying pressure responses, and recognizing familiar mental shortcuts. At first, this awareness arrives late, after decisions are made. With practice, it moves earlier. Eventually, it appears during the decision itself. This progression marks growth. Awareness will not eliminate emotion, it contextualizes it. This fear will become information. Excitement will become a signal, and frustration becomes a prompt to just pause. Rather than being driven by these states, the thinker learns from them. This internal observation will create stability and confidence. When awareness increases, your impulsivity will decrease. Chapter 23, Thinking in Layers. Most people think in straight lines. They think linear. A problem appears, a response follows, the outcome is accepted. This linear approach simplifies reality, but it doesn't reflect it. Real-world systems operate in layers. There is the surface layer, what is visible and immediate. Beneath that is the structural layer, processes, incentives, constraints. Below that is the human layer, emotions, beliefs, identity, perceptions. And beneath all of it lies the time layer, how effects compound and unfold over time. Strategic thinkers learn to perceive all layers simultaneously. They do not treat problems as isolated events. They ask what structural forces are present. They consider how individuals involved perceive the situation. They anticipate how dynamics will evolve. This layered thinking prevents shallow solutions. Fixing the surface without addressing structure will lead to recurrence. It will happen again. Ignoring human perception leads to resistance. Failing to account for time leads to unintended consequences. Layered thinking slows initial decision making, but it's going to accelerate long-term effectiveness. Fewer decisions must be revisited. Fewer mistakes will repeat. Your understanding deepens. This ability will develop gradually. At first, layers are analyzed separately. With experience, they integrate naturally. Eventually, the thinker sees patterns forming before outcomes appear. This is not intuition, it is practiced perception that increases over time. Chapter 24, Becoming Hard to Manipulate. Manipulation thrives on predictability. When responses are consistent and automatic, influence becomes easy. Emotional triggers can be pulled. Urgency can be manufactured. Fear can be exploited. Most manipulation does not come from malicious actors. It emerges from environments that reward speed, compliance, and emotional reactions. Strategic thinkers reduce vulnerability by increasing awareness. They recognize when emotional pressure is being applied. They notice framing that's designed to limit your options. They're going to question narratives that demand immediate agreement. This does not create suspicion, it creates independence. Being hard to manipulate does not mean distrusting everyone. It means evaluating information rather than absorbing it. It means distinguishing persuasion from pressure. The key signal of manipulation is urgency without justification. When time pressure appears without clear consequence, scrutiny is required. Strategic thinkers respond to urgency with pause. They widen their perspective, they reclaim agency. This discipline preserves clarity. Over time, others will see it. Attempts at manipulation will lose effectiveness. Influence shifts. Those who cannot be rushed cannot be controlled. Part 7, The Edge. The final section is not about technique. This is about integration. Strategic thinking is not something that just turns on and off. It becomes a way of operating. Chapter 25, Why Most People Never Develop This Skill. Strategic thinking is learnable, yet few pursue it intentionally. The reason is not ability, it's incentive. Modern environments reward speed, visibility, and reaction. Deep thinking is quiet. It does not perform well in public. It often occurs privately without recognition. Because of this, it is rarely encouraged. Many people equate thinking with intelligence and assume further development is unnecessary. They refine skills, they acquire knowledge, but they never train how they decide. Without deliberate effort, default patterns will persist. The mind continues to operate as it always has. Strategic thinking requires humility. It requires admitting that instinct is unreliable. It requires stepping outside of yourself. False confidence can be misleading. That improvement begins with self observation. This discomfort prevents many from continuing. Those who persist in this will gain something rare: perspective. Chapter 26: Quiet Authority. True authority is never loud. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It emerges through consistency. Individuals who think clearly under pressure influence other people just naturally. Their calm becomes contagious. Their decisions stabilize environments. They speak less, but when they do, weight follows. This authority is earned through process, not through position. Others trust them not because they are certain, but because they are thoughtful. They do not overreact. They do not chase every signal. They respond proportionally. Over time, this reliability becomes power. Quiet authority will never seek dominance. It creates alignment. Chapter 27: Thinking Long While Others Think Loud. Short-term thinking is noisy. It reacts to headlines, emotion, and immediacy. Long-term thinking is more subtle. It considers trajectory rather than the moment. Strategic thinkers prioritize direction over speed. They're going to accept slower progress if it compounds. They avoid decisions that feel good now but weaken their position later. While others respond to urgency, they respond to importance, to precedence. This distinction creates divergence over time. At first, these differences are going to be invisible. Eventually, they become unmistakable. Long thinking rewards patience. It protects against regret. It produces durability. Chapter 28: Integration. Strategic thinking is not a technique that's going to be applied occasionally. It is a posture. It's a way of approaching uncertainty. It's a way of life. It's a discipline of awareness, restraint, and foresight. No single framework is sufficient. Together, they form a system: observation, pause, probability, structure, time, leverage. When integrated, these elements will completely reshape your decision making. The goal is not perfection, it's clarity. Not certainty, but preparedness. Those who train their thinking do not avoid difficulty. They navigate it deliberately. They are not immune to error. They simply make fewer of the same ones. And when they do fail, they learn faster. This is the edge. Not brilliance, not speed, but understanding how to think before acting.